The desert was quiet in a way that felt intentional, as if the land itself was holding its breath. She stood bound to a weather-beaten wooden post at the edge of a ravine, wrists tied tight with rough rope that had already cut into her skin. Blood stained the stones beneath her bare feet where she had been dragged into place. The sun had only just risen, yet the heat was already building, pressing down on her like an unspoken sentence. This was not a prison. It was an ending. The Apache woman lifted her chin and stared across the open land. Her people had not spoken when they left her here. No anger, no mercy, only silence, the kind reserved for those already considered dead. Wolves had been circling the ravine for days. Everyone knew it. That was the point. Execution without blood on human hands. A gust of wind carried the scent of dust and sage and something else. Animal, close. She heard it then, a low howl, distant but unmistakable, answered by another farther off. Her heart hammered, but she refused to cry out. Fear was natural, surrender was not. She closed her eyes and breathed slowly, drawing strength from memory, from her mother's voice telling stories by firelight, from the lessons of endurance taught since childhood, from the belief that dignity mattered, even at the end. Time stretched cruelly. The sun climbed higher. Sweat ran down her back. The ropes burned as she shifted her weight, testing them, not in panic but in instinct. The post held firm. The knots were well made. Whoever tied them knew exactly what they were doing. By mid-morning, she saw movement. Shadows slid between the rocks across the ravine. Yellow eyes watched from a distance, patient and calculating. The wolves did not rush. They never did. They waited until weakness made resistance pointless. She swallowed hard, forcing her breathing to remain steady. If this was how she was meant to die, she would not give the desert the satisfaction of breaking her first. Then faintly, something else reached her ears. Not a howl. A sound out of place. Hooves. She opened her eyes, straining against the glare of the sun. At first she thought it was imagination, a trick of hope, but the sound grew clearer, rhythmic, steady. A rider. Dust rose on the horizon, catching the light like smoke. A lone figure moved slowly along the trail, unaware of the death waiting just beyond the ravine. For the first time since being tied to the post, her control faltered, not with panic, but with urgency. She drew in a breath and shouted. Her voice cracked from thirst, but the sound carried, sharp and human, cutting through the desert's indifference. The wolves shifted uneasily. The rider slowed. Hope was dangerous, but so was silence. As the figure on horseback turned toward the ravine, the Apache woman held herself upright, refusing to collapse. Whether this man rode past or rode toward her would decide everything. And the desert watched, silent, vast, and unforgiving, as fate finally began to move. The rider heard the cry just as he was about to turn back toward the main trail. It wasn't loud, it wasn't strong, but it didn't belong to the desert. The cowboy pulled his horse to a halt, squinting into the sun. Out here, strange sounds usually meant trouble, and trouble often meant death. He could ride on. Most men would. No one would blame him for avoiding something that wasn't his concern. Then he heard it again. Human. He guided the horse toward the ravine, every instinct sharp and alert. As he crested the rise, the sight before him made his stomach tighten. A woman, Apache, tied to a post like an animal set out as bait. Her wrists were bound, her clothes torn, her skin marked by dust and blood. She stood straight despite it all, eyes fixed on him with a mixture of exhaustion and defiance. Around the ravine, movement flickered between rocks. Wolves, waiting. The cowboy swore softly. This wasn't justice. This was abandonment dressed up as tradition. He scanned the area quickly. No other riders, no sign of an ambush, just wolves and silence. Still, danger pressed in from every direction. Cutting her free would make noise. Staying too long could mean being surrounded. The sensible choice was to leave. He felt it tug at him. Survival habit, the rules men learned out here. Then the woman stumbled slightly, catching herself against the post. That was enough. The cowboy dismounted, rifle in hand, moving with purpose. He fired a warning shot into the air. The crack echoed across the ravine, sending the wolves back a few paces, snarling but cautious. They knew fire and thunder. He reached her in seconds. "Hold on," he said, voice low but steady, as he cut through the ropes with his knife. Her knees buckled the moment the bindings fell. He caught her before she hit the ground. She was lighter than he expected and burning with fever. The wolves crept closer again. No time. He lifted her onto his horse, securing her as best he could. Another shot rang out, closer this time, kicking up dust near the nearest wolf. The pack hesitated. That hesitation saved them. The cowboy mounted and turned hard, urging the horse into a full run. Dust exploded behind them as they fled the ravine. For a moment, he heard paws pounding after them, breath hot and hungry. Then nothing. The wolves fell back, unwilling to chase steel and fire too far. Miles later, the cowboy slowed, heart hammering. The woman clung weakly to the saddle horn, her breath shallow but steady. She was alive. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. What he knew was this: he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Saving her meant responsibility, questions, consequences. But as he looked down at her, still upright despite pain, despite terror, he knew one thing with certainty. Leaving her behind would have cost him more than wolves ever could. The desert stretched on ahead, and the path he had chosen no longer led back to the life he knew. The cowboy did not stop riding until the land began to change. The ravine fell behind them, replaced by flatter ground and scattered scrub. Only when the horse's breath grew heavy did he finally slow, guiding it toward an old line shack half hidden by rock and brush. It wasn't much: 4 walls, a crooked door, and a roof that leaked when rain came, but it was shelter. That was enough. He dismounted carefully and lifted the woman down, supporting her weight as her legs nearly gave out. She didn't resist. She didn't cling either. Pride still held her spine straight, even now. Inside, the shack smelled of dust and old wood. The cowboy laid her on a blanket he kept rolled behind the saddle and poured water into a tin cup. "Slow," he said, holding it to her lips. She drank carefully, eyes never leaving his face. Only after her breathing steadied did he speak again. "You're safe here, for now." She nodded once. "You risked your life." He shrugged slightly. Didn't feel right not to. He cleaned the cuts on her wrists first. The rope had bitten deep. She flinched only once, then still, jaw set. He noticed the scars, older ones, signs of a life that had already known hardship. "You don't cry easily," he said. "Crying wastes breath," she replied quietly. Night fell quickly. The desert cooled fast, trading heat for cold without apology. The cowboy fed the fire and kept watch, rifle close. Wolves howled in the distance, but none came near. When she finally spoke again, her voice was stronger. "My name is Anita," she said. "I was meant to die today." He looked at her across the fire. "Not if I had anything to say about it." She studied him, as if weighing his words against his actions. "Among my people," she said, "being left for the wolves means you no longer belong." The cowboy frowned. Then they were wrong. She tilted her head slightly. Maybe, or maybe fear made them forget who they were. He understood that too well. Silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It carried questions neither of them rushed to ask. He gave her food. She accepted it without suspicion. Trust did not arrive all at once, it crept in, step by step. Before sleep claimed her, Anita spoke again. "You could have ridden past." "I know," he said. "Why didn't you?" The cowboy stared into the fire, searching for an answer simple enough to be true. "Because if I had," he said finally, I wouldn't recognize the man I saw tomorrow." She nodded slowly, as if that made sense. Outside, the wolves howled again, farther now. Inside the shack, two lives from different worlds rested under the same fragile roof. Neither knew what morning would bring, only that the desert had tested them both. And they had survived. Morning arrived without kindness. Cold air crept through the cracks of the lined shack, carrying the smell of dust and old rain. The cowboy rose before dawn, stepping outside to scan the land. No tracks, no wolves, but danger in the desert rarely announced itself loudly. It waited. When he returned inside, Tayanita was awake, sitting upright despite the stiffness in her limbs. Her wrists were swollen, but her eyes were sharp. "You did not leave," she said. "I said you were safe," he replied. "I meant it." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Then I will walk with you." He hesitated. "You don't know where I'm headed." She stood slowly, steadying herself against the wall. "Anywhere is better than where I was left." They set out as the sun rose, moving carefully across the land. The cowboy walked beside the horse so she could ride when her strength failed. He never rushed her. She never asked him to. As the hours passed, they spoke more. She told him how fear had turned her people against her after a raid she survived. Survival had marked her as cursed. The old ways had been twisted by panic. Leaving her for the wolves had been easier than facing the truth. "I was already dead to them," she said quietly. The cowboy listened, jaw tight. "Fear makes cowards of good people," he said. "I've seen it." By midday, heat returned with force. Water ran low. Tayanita noticed his concern. "There is a spring beyond those rocks," she said, pointing ahead. "If it still lives." They found it barely flowing, but enough. They drank, rested, and pressed on. That afternoon, they spotted riders on a distant ridge. The cowboy stiffened. "If they're after you." "They won't be," she said calmly. "They believe the wolves finished their work." He nodded, uneasy but trusting her judgment. As night approached, they made camp beneath a stand of weathered trees. Firelight flickered between them as silence settled, not the heavy silence of fear, but the kind built from shared effort. "You risk more the longer you stay with me," Tayanita said. He met her gaze. "Some things are worth the risk." She looked away, then back. "Where I come from, saving a life binds fate." He smiled faintly. "Where I come from, it just means you did the right thing." The desert stretched endlessly around them, but it no longer felt empty. Two figures moved within it now, no longer prey, no longer alone. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to walk. And for the first time since the wolves' howls echoed across the ravine, hope traveled with them. The land grew harsher the farther they traveled. Rock replaced sand, and the wind cut sharper as they moved toward higher ground. The cowboy kept a steady pace, watching the horizon more than the trail. He knew this territory, knew how quickly trouble could appear where the land narrowed and choices thinned. Tayanita sensed it too. "You're listening for something," she said quietly as they walked. He nodded, "Riders or worse." She slowed, then spoke with careful honesty. "If my people find us, they may not see what you see." He stopped and looked at her. "Then they'll see me first." The words surprised them both, not because of bravery, but because of certainty. Somewhere along the road, the choice to protect her had stopped feeling temporary. They reached a narrow pass by late afternoon. Tall rocks pressed in on both sides, shadows stretching long and cold. It was the kind of place ambushes favored. The cowboy dismounted, leading the horse by the reins. Halfway through, he heard it, the faint scrape of stone. "Down," he whispered. Tayanita moved instantly, crouching behind a boulder as two figures appeared above the pass. Not wolves, men, armed, nervous. One called out in Apache. Tayanita closed her eyes briefly. They followed to be certain. The cowboy stepped forward into view, rifle lowered but ready. "She's under my protection," he said calmly. "You don't have to like it, but you will respect it." The men hesitated. They had expected prey, not resistance. Tayanita stood beside him then, not behind. "I live," she said firmly in her language, "and I choose my path." Silence stretched tight. Finally, one of the men turned away. The other lingered, eyes flicking between them, then followed. No threats, no forgiveness, just retreat. When they were gone, the cowboy exhaled slowly. "You could have walked away," Tayanita said. "So could you," he replied. They shared a look that needed no words. That night they camped beneath the open sky. The stars were sharp and endless. Tayanita fed the fire while the cowboy cleaned his rifle, movement slow, thoughtful. "I was prey once," she said softly. "Today I was not." He looked at her. "You never were." She smiled at that, not wide but real. The road ahead remained uncertain. There would be more danger, more choices, but something fundamental had changed. The wolves no longer hunted her. Fear no longer ruled her. And the cowboy, once content to ride alone, no longer measured safety by distance from others. He measured it by who stood beside him when the past tried to pull them back. The fire crackled softly as the desert night closed in. And for the first time since the ravine, neither of them felt hunted. They reached the edge of the valley just after dawn. Below them stretched a wide basin of grass and scattered cottonwood trees, cut by a thin ribbon of water that shimmered in the early light. To the cowboy, it looked like a place a man could stop running. To Tayanita, it looked like a place untouched by the past. They descended slowly. The cowboy's cabin stood near the creek, weathered, sturdy, built by hands that believed in staying. He hadn't seen it in months, but it greeted him like an old truth waiting patiently. "This is where you live?" Tayanita asked. "For now," he said, "been thinking about leaving." She looked at him. "Are you still?" He didn't answer right away. Inside the cabin, he showed her simple things, where water was kept, where food was stored, how the door latched against wind. He gave her space, the same way he had since the ravine. Respect mattered more than words. Days passed. Her strength returned slowly. She helped where she could, gathering herbs near the creek, mending torn cloth, moving with purpose. At night, they spoke more openly. "I was taught that survival was everything," she said one evening, "but living is different." He nodded. "Took me a long time to learn that." Sometimes silence filled the space between them, but it no longer felt empty. It felt chosen. One afternoon, as clouds gathered heavy and dark, Tayanita stood at the doorway, watching the sky. "If my people come," she said, "they will not ask politely." The cowboy leaned against the frame. "Then they'll hear my answer all the same." She turned to him. "Why are you still here?" He considered that. "Because leaving you wasn't an option, and leaving this place, maybe that isn't either." She stepped closer, voice steady. "Where I come from, when a life is saved, it creates a bond, not ownership, responsibility." He met her eyes. "I didn't save you to own anything." "I know," she said. "That's why the bond matters." Rain came that night, hard and sudden. They secured the cabin together, laughter breaking through the thunder when the roof leaked in familiar places. For a moment, the world felt small and human. Later, as the storm softened, Tayanita spoke again. "I will not be prey again," she said. "Not to wolves, not to fear, not to fate." He nodded. "Then neither will I." The desert had tested them both, had stripped them down to choice and consequence. What remained was not obligation. It was intention. And that, they both knew, was stronger than anything the past could demand. The riders came at sunrise. The cowboy saw the dust first, thin lines rising against the pale sky. He stood still at the edge of the porch, counting shapes, judging distance. 3, maybe 4, not a war party, but not lost men either. Tayanita joined him quietly. She did not reach for a weapon. She did not hide. "They came sooner than I thought," she said. He glanced at her. "You want to leave?" She shook her head once. "I am done running." The riders approached slowly, hands visible. The lead man dismounted first, older, his posture heavy with authority. He spoke in Apache, his voice steady but guarded. "You were left," he said to Tayanita. "You should not be standing here." "I am standing," she replied calmly, "because I lived." The man's eyes shifted to the cowboy. "You interfered with what was decided." The cowboy stepped forward, placing himself between them, not aggressively but clearly. "I stopped a killing," he said. "That's all." The elder studied him for a long moment. "In doing so, you changed the balance." Tayanita spoke again, firm and clear. "The balance was broken when fear chose for you." Silence followed. The wind moved through the grass. The creek murmured behind them, indifferent to human law. Finally the elder sighed. "You cannot return as you were," he said to her. "The old path is closed." "I know," she answered. "I did not come to ask for it." He nodded slowly, then his gaze returned to the cowboy. "And you?" The cowboy did not hesitate. "She stays by choice, not because of debt, not because of force." Tayanita placed a hand lightly on his arm, not to claim him, but to stand with him. The riders exchanged looks. They had expected fear, resistance, bargaining. They found none. At last the elder mounted his horse. "Then your path is your own," he said to Tayanita. "May it be stronger than the one we failed to walk." They turned and rode away without threat or blessing, only acknowledgement. When the dust settled, the cowboy exhaled deeply. "You okay?" he asked. Tayanita nodded. "I am free." He smiled faintly. "Then so am I guess." They stood together in the quiet aftermath, the weight of the moment sinking in. No traditions binding them, no past demanding payment. Only choice. The sun climbed higher. The valley stretched open before them. For the first time since the ravine, the future did not feel like something to survive. It felt like something to build. And they would decide together what shape it would take. Time did not rush them. The days that followed were simple, almost quiet in a way neither had known before. The valley settled into routine, water drawn from the creek, meals cooked slowly, work shared without instruction. The cabin no longer felt like a place the cowboy returned to. It felt like a place he lived. Tayanita took to the land as if it had been waiting for her. She learned the rhythm of the valley, where herbs grew after rain, where animals passed at dawn. She brought knowledge with her, not as something to prove, but something to offer. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the hills gold, the cowboy watched her from the porch. "You could still leave," he said gently. "Choose something else." She smiled, not sadly, peacefully. "I already did." They never named what bound them. They didn't need to. It wasn't debt. It wasn't rescue. It was the quiet agreement that neither would turn away again, from danger or from each other. Weeks later, a traveler stopped by the cabin, a rancher passing through. He looked from the cowboy to Tayanita and nodded once, respectful. "Good land," he said, "hard-earned peace." After the man left, the cowboy laughed softly. "Guess folks notice." "They always do," Tayanita replied, "when something is real." Winter crept closer, but the fear it once carried never arrived. Wolves passed through the valley sometimes, their howls distant and uninterested. They were no longer hunters, just part of the land. One night as the fire burned low, Tayanita spoke quietly. "I was meant to die in that ravine." The cowboy shook his head. "No, you were meant to live, the rest we figured out." She looked at him, eyes reflecting firelight. "You didn't just save my life." He met her gaze. "You saved mine too." The desert had tried to make them prey. Fear had tried to decide their worth. Tradition had tried to close their future. All of it failed. Because when the moment came, when it mattered, They chose courage over comfort, humanity over silence. And in that choice, they built something stronger than survival. They built a life. As the fire faded and stars filled the sky, the valley held them gently, two souls no longer running, no longer alone. Not because fate demanded it, but because they chose to stay.